In this webinar presentation we will look at how remote therapy works, why dry blood is okay to use, and how to explain the BICOM chip. To answer the question about remote therapy, we need a basic understanding of physics because it involves communication between cells. New research is coming out all the time about how pathogens communicate with each other and the role the immune system plays in this. Patients and therapists know that certain things work but don't always know how to explain them in a scientific way. If you didn't do physics at school, then this might be new to you, or you may not have discussed quantum physics, entanglement, or quantum non-locality. Big words, aren't they? So let's get into some quantum physics, shall we? Firstly, this is an accepted subject taught in most universities around the world, and leading physicists have made many controlled experiments. As far back as 1935, Albert Einstein called what we are discussing today spooky action at a distance, a theory referred to quantum entanglement, which states that sending a frequency to one particle locally will also instantly influence another particle regardless of how far apart they are. In other words, affecting one local particle will affect another particle regardless of distance, even the other side of the world. But more on that later. In the 1950s, David Bohm did much research on particles and wave function. We look at some of the experiments that show wave function and how it relates to what we are doing as therapists. In the 1960s, John Bell made many convincing experiments which have been reaffirmed many times that our world is non-local. Non-local here means that there exists interactions between events that are too far apart in space and too close together in time for the events to be connected, even by signals moving at the speed of light. This contradicted some of Einstein's view, but as more research is conducted, then our view changes in the light of new science. In the 1980s, Bell's research was subject to further verification. Let's start looking at matter. What is matter? Well, everything is made from matter, and matter is made from atoms. Atoms are the basic units of matter and also the defining structure of elements. The term atom comes from the Greek word indivisible, because it was once thought that atoms were the smallest thing in the universe and could not be divided. We now know that atoms are made up of three particles, neutrons, protons and electrons, which are composed of even smaller particles such as quarks. We could say that atoms are like Lego bricks, and with a few different blocks all sorts of structures can be made. My son and I have just completed this very large model with over 7,500 pieces. With just a few pieces, great complex models can be made. So let's look at atoms. So how is an atom structured? Well, the nucleus contains nearly all the mass and has a positive charge, and the electrons orbit the nucleus like the planets around the sun. These parts can be split, so the atom is dividable. To give you an idea about the structure of the atom, imagine a football field and a peanut in the middle. The electrons would be orbiting at the extremities. These electrons behave like a wave rather than a particle. These wave patterns help to stabilize their orbit. It's important for this discussion that we understand the difference between particles and waves. Can these be measured and proved? Yes, by using the double split test. If you fired a ball bearing through two slots, they would simply collect on the other side. But electron waves continue to act like a wave and continue to disperse and interact as shown on the detector screen here. This is a way to prove that waves are emitted from atoms and particles. Waves similar to throwing a stone in a pond and the ripples move out and expand. Or when you dial a number from a mobile phone to the other side of the world, waves are transmitted and go out to receivers. It's understood that particles, atoms, can transmit information to each other, just like the example of the mobile telephone that we used. But it goes beyond this. When you study quantum entanglement, because it explains that two particles or even their smaller parts become entangled with each other. Physicists can even cause things to become entangled so that they can test the theory. Entangled particles change when their partner changes simultaneously. Let me share my screen with you and watch the team from Seeker explain recent research on this.
Albert Einstein was, there's no other word for it, a genius. The man conceived of special and general relativity, theories that had been breaking brains since the early 1900s. But when it came to the idea that two particles can be entangled and an effect on one could be instantaneously felt by the other, even over vast distances, well, for Einstein, that was simply unbelievable. He dubbed it spooky action at a distance and went to his grave a skeptic. But since then, quantum entanglement has been demonstrated time and again, and now, for the first time ever, we've taken a picture of it. To achieve this, researchers from the University of Glasgow shot an ultraviolet laser at a crystal, which broke apart some of the photons from the beam, creating two entangled photons. When particles are entangled, their properties or states, like spin or phase polarization, will be linked. But until they are measured, those properties will remain in superposition, meaning it can be in multiple states at once. Observing one particle will make it take on one state, while at the same exact moment, its entangled twin will take on the opposite state. The entangled property of the photons the researchers chose to observe was their phase. Remember that photons can behave as both particles and waves, and a photon's phase is where it is in its wave oscillation. Photons that are in step or in phase can amplify each other to give a brighter intensity, and out of phase they can cancel each other out to give darkness. Once these entangled photons were created, they were split and sent on different paths. Down one path, the scientists set up a filter that would limit the photon to one of 4 different phases. Passing through this filter is effectively the same as observing the photon's phase, so as soon as its phase was determined, its entangled partner traveling down the other path would take on the opposite. Finally, when the two entangled photons in opposite phases were simultaneously detected, a super-sensitive camera capable of detecting individual photons would take a picture. Scientists repeated this until they could build up an image of the entangled photons, allowing the waves to amplify and cancel each other out. And without further ado, here it is. The photons look like eyes, so spooky definitely seems like the right word for what we're looking at. If you look closely, you'll notice 2 gaps in the circle where the intensity smoothly drops off to 0. That's the phase the scientists were measuring. And this picture further counters how Einstein thought quantum entanglement could work. To make entanglement jibe with classical descriptions of physics, he proposed so-called hidden variables that would act as a messenger between entangled pairs. When he proposed this, no one knew how to test if a hidden variable was at play or if the quantum world was just really weird. In 1964, almost a decade after Einstein's death, physicist John Bell came up with a theorem that can distinguish between Einstein's proposed hidden variable explanation of spooky action and quantum mechanics' entanglement explanation. These statements are known as Bell's inequalities, and years after he devised them, they were tested and contradicted Einstein's idea of a hidden variable. This photo adds to the pile of evidence against Einstein, violating Bell's inequality that assumes the hidden variable interpretation.
So how can we explain this in layman's terms? Well, it has been reported in some cases that people have had blood transfusions or organ transplants can take on an altered personality similar to that of the donor. Or identical twins can at times have connections to each other not easily explained by people that don't have an identical twin. Could it be that when the cells and particles and atoms were in a single body, like the mother or the person, that they became entangled and then when separated, regardless of distance, they can still communicate with each other. This might explain why many BICOM therapists are able to test blood samples by sending frequencies to it and observing if resonance is found or not. It would also explain why some clients feel the same effects of administered frequencies that they do when they are physically attached to the BICOM, but it's like the blood sample is making the phone call to its entangled partner. More laboratory testing would be needed to prove that this is what is happening, but many thousands of clients and therapists have recorded results which to them prove that this method works. London City Girl did a video called Quantum Mechanics for Dummies. Let's see a snippet of that video to help us understand how sending frequencies to a blood sample can work.
Using quantum entanglement, scientists have been able to teleport particles. Two particles are entangled and separated by a large distance. A third particle, particle T, is brought in, and this is the particle that we want to teleport. This particle T interacts with particle A, and we learn how the quantum state of particle T relates to particle A. This information is then sent across to where particle B is kept. As particle A and B are entangled, this information about how the quantum state of particle T relates to particle A will also reveal how the quantum state of particle T relates to particle B. Particle B will then be manipulated to replicate the quantum state of particle T, becoming an exact copy of particle T. Meanwhile, the original particle T is destroyed as its information was extracted and sent across. This method of teleportation has only ever been done on particles, and why do we accept quantum mechanics? The predictions of quantum mechanics have proved so reliable that we cannot ignore the experimental evidence that corroborate the theory. The entire electronics industry is built on using quantum theory. Those principles have led to the invention of lasers, transistors, and the integrated circuit. The future of quantum mechanics, the quantum computer. The first quantum computers are currently being developed. Harnessing a particle's ability to be in many states at once means that multiple processes can be executed simultaneously, increasing our computing power exponentially. Our lives have already been changed dramatically by technology, and when the power of quantum computers is realized, it will herald the dawn of a new era in technological advancement.
In the Resonate Clinic in Leeds, regular blood samples are sent for testing. Only last week, samples were received and placed into the BICOM body check. The patient seemed to have a normal energetic state throughout the body, but the right leg showed massive energetic stress. In fact, the worst we'd ever seen. We called the client because it was so unusual and physical symptoms must have been present. The client hadn't disclosed anything to us, but the client then disclosed that they were unable to work due to severe pain in the right leg and had a constant limp. When accounts like this happen on a daily basis, then you know without doubt that some cellular communication must be happening. But many ask, well, what if the blood sample is old and dry? Well, if you research atoms, particles, protons, etc., you will learn that an atom can become unstable and electrons can collapse into the nucleus, but generally the atom can live for very long periods. Cells and other living matter that were in the blood will die, but other things won't and can continue to communicate. Just like an older mobile phone can still make that call if it's connected to a cellular network. So in order to provide a therapy to someone who is not present in the clinic, a blood sample is required for the input cup and a second sample to go into the output, which we can use the chip charger, for example, for it's more powerful than the mat. We place the blood sample next to the chip, and the chip is then sent to the client in the post. We send the chip in the post because it's much easier to explain to a client that the therapy has been recorded onto the chip and must be applied to the skin for a duration of 2 to 3 weeks. Now that we understand that waves are involved in cellular communication, we can explain that our therapy is like sound waves. You remember that you used to record your music onto cassettes, the cassettes that had the brown tape in them? Well, in a player, these waves would be sent from the brown tape to your ears, similar to the chip, emitting healing waves made just for the client. So we can record onto these chips like we would record onto the brown tape. Some send the frequencies from the BICOM into oil or mineral water as an alternative to the chip. This is just like homeopathic drops, frequencies stored in water. The original substance is no longer detected, but the potentized frequencies left are actually more effective than the original substance. During the current period where many cannot leave their homes, you might decide to offer these services at a reduced rate. If you wanted to send the same frequencies to multiple people, then you can use a few blood samples on the maximum of 4 chip charges as the signal gets weaker, or place the samples on the mat. So that concludes this very short explanation of a very complex subject that is still being researched. Hopefully, you can try some of these suggestions and start recording results. If you document these, then you will have evidence that this works for you, and you can help many people that are not able to come and see you with being able to continue their therapy.